As evening closes in, the order comes down from the flag bridge, an instruction that violates every instinct of a naval officer. A friendly capital ship has been abandoned, and she must be sent down fast. In the water nearby, whaleboats and rafts drift, filled with soot-stained sailors watching their home die. They are witnessing the final, irreversible step of the Battle of the Coral Sea. The target is the USS Lexington. She is not sinking in that moment because of fresh enemy blows. She is being sent down by an American decision to deny her to the enemy, but the true cause of her loss was written hours earlier, not by steel, but by gasoline vapor and fire. On May 8, 1942, the carrier known as Lady Lex is operating in the Coral Sea, off the approaches to Australia. She is a converted battlecruiser hull, massive, fast, and heavily armored. When the Japanese task force attacks, she absorbs punishment that would break a smaller vessel. 2 torpedoes strike her port side. Bomb hits and near misses slam the ship, tearing into the flight deck and the spaces below. The impact is violent, but it is not immediately fatal. The damage control teams are elite. Within an hour, they correct the list. The fires are suppressed. The flight deck crews continue to recover aircraft. For a brief window of time, it appears the ship will survive to fight again. But deep inside the hull, a silent, invisible failure is converting the ship into a bomb. The torpedo impacts have ruptured aviation gasoline lines and tanks. This fuel, known as avgas, is highly volatile. It does not stay as a liquid. It leaks into damaged spaces and begins to evaporate. The heavy, colorless vapor creeps through passageways and ventilation trunks, settling into lower compartments where it can accumulate. In the darkness, it mixes with air to form an explosive atmosphere. It waits for a single spark. Sailors call it a secondary explosion. The blast happens inside the ship's own enclosed spaces, not out at the skin where the sea can swallow it. With nowhere to vent, pressure and flame are forced down passageways and into bulkheads, turning corridors into conduits for destruction. Hours after the strike aircraft have vanished over the horizon, the carrier's ruptured fuel system finally lights off. A violent internal explosion rips through the ship around 12:47. Another follows later in the afternoon, around 14:45, spreading fire and shock through the carrier's interior. The blasts and heat cripple the fire main system. Without water pressure, the damage control teams lose their primary weapon against the flames. The fire becomes an autonomous, self-feeding engine. It moves from compartment to compartment, cooking off ammunition and heating the steel until the structural integrity of the hangar deck begins to fail. Captain Frederick Sherman realizes that the battle against the physics of the fire is mathematically impossible to win. The priority shifts from salvage to survival. The evacuation of the Lexington is controlled and methodical. There is no panic. Men line up their shoes on the flight deck before sliding down ropes into the warm water. They lower the wounded into whaleboats. The scale of the rescue is staggering. About 2,770 men go over the side. Captain Frederick Sherman tours the burning decks, checking gun pits and ready rooms to ensure no living soul remains aboard. He is among the last to leave the ship. But the hull does not sink immediately. She remains afloat, burning, a beacon in the twilight that could attract Japanese submarines. This forces the American command to make the hard choice. The destroyer USS Phelps is ordered to scuttle the carrier, firing torpedoes into her starboard side. Most accounts describe, too, the great ship rolls over. She slides beneath the surface with aircraft still on board and with 216 men already lost in the battle. As the water closes over the flight deck, the USS Lexington transitions from a machine of war into a coordinate of history. She begins a long, silent fall into the darkness. The location on the surface is marked on the charts, but the currents and the drift mean that her final resting place on the seabed is not a certainty. She disappears into a realm where the rules of salvage change completely, leaving behind the world of sunlight and fire for a world of crushing cold. 3,000 meters, roughly 9,843 feet of water overhead. In the vertical geography of the ocean, it is the boundary between what can be reached and what is simply lost. To reach the resting place of the USS Lexington, one must descend beyond sunlight, beyond military submarines, and far beyond the physiological limits of any human diver. At this depth, the dominant force is hydrostatic pressure, the primary antagonist of deep ocean survey. Roughly every 33 feet of seawater adds about 1 atmosphere of load, on top of the one atmosphere we already live under. By the time one reaches the floor of the Coral Sea, pressure becomes an omnidirectional vice, hunting for any trapped air, any sealed void, and trying to equalize it by implosion. This physical reality creates a hard wall for traditional salvage operations. There is no possibility of sending a team to cut into the hull, and no possibility of floating the wreck to the surface. The physics of the water column dictate that the ship stays where she landed. This hostile environment explains why the carrier remained hidden for 76 years. The Coral Sea is vast, and the depth acts as a shroud. For decades after the war, the technology required to scan the bottom at this range was rare, expensive, limited to a small number of navies and research institutions. The wreck lay in total darkness on soft sediment, protected by the sheer logistical difficulty of reaching her. Because accessing that plane demands a vessel built to withstand forces that would crumple a standard submarine like a tin can. The challenge is not just the vertical distance. The location is 500 miles from the nearest major landmass, so any mission to this zone must bring its own support infrastructure, its own power generation, and its own contingency plans. There is no rescue if equipment fails at the bottom. And if a machine is lost down there, it stays down there. For over 7 decades, the Lexington existed only as a set of coordinates on a fading chart and a memory in the minds of the survivors. The ocean held the ship in a state of suspended animation. The cold temperature, near freezing, slows the chemical reactions of corrosion. The darkness prevents biological growth that consumes shallow water wrecks. But the pressure remains constant, a silent weight pressing against the flight deck and the hangar doors. To break the seal of silence requires a shift in strategy. It is not enough to simply know where the ship went down. You need a platform that can reach the deep, hostile zone and work there without risking human life. The search for the Lady Lex becomes a test of engineering against the weight of the ocean itself. The environment permits only one type of visitor, a machine built to exist where biology cannot. The instrument that bridges the gap between the surface world and the deep ocean floor is a marvel of modern engineering known as the remotely operated vehicle. In March of 2018, the research vessel Petrel arrives in the Coral Sea to deploy this specific technology. The mission is not a treasure hunt, it is a systematic forensic sweep designed to locate a needle in a haystack of sediment. The primary tool is a robotic submersible, tethered to the mothership by an armored umbilical cable that carries power down and data up. The ROV is the avatar of the salvage team. It allows engineers to sit in a control center, dry and at atmospheric pressure, while virtually projecting their senses into the crushing depth of the abyss. The machine is equipped with banks of high-intensity LED lights capable of piercing the eternal darkness. It carries high-definition cameras that resolve details down to the millimeter. Thrusters allow it to hover with the precision of a helicopter, maneuvering around obstacles without making physical contact. This is the core doctrine of the survey: finding without touching. The search begins with acoustic mapping. Deep-tow side-scan sonar paints the bottom with sound, looking for hard returns that stand out against the soft geological background of the seabed. When the sonar teams identify an anomaly that matches the dimensions of a capital ship, the ROV is prepped for the dive. The descent is a long, slow fall through the water column. For hours, the cameras see nothing but the blue fading to black, and then the endless stream of marine snow, the organic particulate matter drifting down from above. When the vehicle reaches the bottom, the pilots activate the main floodlights. The beam cuts through decades of darkness. The first visual confirmations are pieces of scattered wreckage, a debris field scattered by the sinking and whatever happened during the descent and impact. The pilots follow the trail of metal until a massive vertical shape looms out of the gloom. The cameras pan across the steel and reveal a 5-inch gun mount. The barrels are not stowed in a travel position. They are trained out at an elevated angle, frozen where the crew last left them. An impression of readiness, not a measurable firing solution. The ROV glides past the gun mount, recording every rivet and every patch of corrosion. The operators on the surface watch the monitors in silence, witnessing a scene that has remained frozen since 1942. The vehicle keeps its distance and works with light, cameras, and sonar to document the hull and the debris field, building a 3-dimensional record without contact. The physical structure remains where it is, protected by its status as a war grave and by the immense pressure of the deep. As the ROV continues its sweep, the lights illuminate something more specific than the ship's hull. Lying in the sediment nearby are smaller shapes distinct from the twisted steel of the carrier itself. They are the wings and fuselages of aircraft. The debris field contains the ship's air wing spilled from the deck as she rolled over. The hull confirms the location, but to prove the identity beyond all doubt, the team needs to find a specific fingerprint. They need a name, a number, or a symbol that belongs uniquely to the USS Lexington. The sensors have found the graveyard, but the identification requires reading the headstones. In the warm, oxygen-rich waters of the shallows, time erases ships quickly. Corrosion is rapid, and biological growth is aggressive. Coral, barnacles, and rust turn recognizable machines into amorphous reefs. But on the deep seabed, the clock runs differently. Near freezing temperatures and a low-energy world cut off from sunlight slow the chemistry of decay and limit the kind of growth that consumes shallow water wrecks. So when the lights of the ROV strike the hull, they do not reveal a featureless orange silhouette. They reveal plating and paint that are unusually well preserved for a wartime wreck, still scarred, still damaged, but not erased. The condition of the main hull presents a stark contrast between preservation and destruction. The ship sits upright on the seabed. She did not capsize on impact with the bottom, which allows the survey team to inspect the flight deck and the superstructure in their operational orientation. The anti-skid paint on the deck is still rough and visible. The gray vertical surfaces of the island retain their sharp military lines. It creates a visual paradox where the texture of the material suggests a recent loss, while the structural damage tells the story of a catastrophic event. The ship did not arrive in one piece. The violence of the sinking and the hydrostatic pressure during the descent caused a massive structural failure. The bow section is separated from the main carcass of the ship. It lies some distance away, torn free by the hydrodynamic forces acting on the flat hull as it plummeted through the water column. The stern stands proud, but the separation zone is a tangled maw of torn plating and exposed girders. This damage makes it difficult to read the ship's length or verify the geometry of the impact that sent her down. This preservation anomaly creates a unique forensic opportunity. In a standard decay scenario, the paint dissolves, taking with it the numbers, the warning labels, and the insignia that distinguish one ship from another. On the Lexington, the anoxic preservation has locked these details in place. The hull acts as a time capsule. The damage tells the story of the end, but the surviving surface details tell the story of the life of the vessel. The survey team maneuvers the ROV along the edge of the flight deck. They are looking for the cargo that was on deck when the ship rolled over. The preservation effect should extend to the aircraft as well. If the chemistry of the deep has protected the steel of the carrier, it should have protected the aluminum of the planes. The hull proves that a large carrier lies here, but to confirm the specific identity of the Lady Lex, the investigators need to find the equipment she carried. The clean steel promises that the evidence is waiting, untouched by the decades, ready to provide a definitive link to the Battle of the Coral Sea. The focus of the lights shifts from the broken architecture of the ship to the debris field scattered in the sediment around her. The expectation for any metal object resting on the ocean floor for 3/4 of a century is that it will be monochrome. The assumption is that the sea washes away all pigment, leaving only the dull orange of rust or the gray of silt. But as the cameras of the survey vehicle push into the debris field surrounding the main hull, that assumption is shattered by a flash of bright yellow. Lying in the sediment is the fuselage of an American fighter plane. It is an F-4F Wildcat. The aluminum skin is not corroded, it is smooth. The blue paint of the upper fuselage is distinct, contrasting sharply with the light gray of the underside. But the definitive proof is painted on the side of the cockpit. The lights illuminate a cartoon image of a black cat carrying a bomb with a burning fuse. It is the famous Felix the Cat insignia, an emblem associated with Lexington's fighter squadrons, carried into the Coral Sea by Fighter Squadron 2, and rooted in the earlier traditions of Fighter Squadron 3. It is the fingerprint they came for. To the right of the mascot, the camera reveals a detail that chills the observers. 4 small Japanese flags painted on the fuselage as kill marks. It is a frozen record of the combat that took place on the morning of May 8th. The presence of dozens of aircraft in the debris field, including TBD Devastators and SBD Dauntlesses, confirms that this is the air group of the USS Lexington. The colors are so vibrant that they look as if they were painted yesterday, preserved by the unique chemistry of the deep. With the identity of the ship locked beyond any doubt, the survey turns to the hull to verify the cause of the sinking. The historical record describes the destroyer USS Phelps firing torpedoes to scuttle the carrier after the crew was taken off. The ROV maneuvers to the starboard flank of the wreck. The steel tells the truth. The cameras record the impact zones, counting the wounds. The damage aligns perfectly with the firing solution of a friendly destroyer. This confirms the act of scuttling. Scuttling is a distinct naval operation, fundamentally different from a sinking caused by enemy fire. It is a deliberate, calculated decision to destroy a high-value asset to prevent it from falling into enemy hands, or to remove a navigational hazard. It is the ultimate act of ownership. The captain decides when the ship ends, denying that victory to the opponent. Forensically, scuttling wounds are often distinctive because they are inflicted on a stationary or slowly moving target, allowing for precise placement. The torpedo hits on the Lexington are the final signature of the crew's discipline. They followed orders to the very end, ensuring the ship could not be towed or salvaged by the Japanese Navy. The combination of the squadron markings and the scuttling damage creates a complete forensic dossier. The evidence is absolute. In a traditional salvage operation, this moment would mark the beginning of the recovery phase. Cables would be lowered and artifacts would be cut free to be brought to the surface for museums. But for the Lexington, the clarity of the video data changes the decision matrix. Because the identification is 100% certain and the condition of the artifacts is documented down to the rivet, there is no technical need to lift anything. Bringing an aircraft up from this depth would expose it to oxygen, humidity, and temperature changes that would immediately trigger rapid deterioration. The surface world would destroy the very preservation that makes the site so special. The team leaves the evidence exactly where it lies. The Felix the Cat, Wildcat will remain on the bottom, guarding the flank of the carrier, safe in the darkness. The coordinates of the USS Lexington are not being publicly released, not because the wreck cannot be fixed on a chart, but because discovery does not create a right of salvage. Even when a wreck is found, a sunken U.S. naval vessel does not become free salvage. Under U.S. law and long-standing policy, the carrier remains U.S. government property and a protected sunken military craft. For visitors, the rule is simple: observe, document, and leave no trace. Discovery does not open a door. It draws a line. This status is defined by the concept of a war grave. In naval tradition and international law, a sunken military craft that contains the remains of its crew is considered a sanctuary. It is not abandoned property. The title to the vessel remains with the government that launched it, regardless of how much time has passed. For the Lexington, this legal shield is absolute. The 216 men who died during the explosions and the fire or who were trapped when the ship went down are still on board. The wreck is their tomb. The protection of a war grave dictates the rules of engagement for any visitor. It prohibits the removal of artifacts. It prohibits the cutting of steel. It prohibits any disturbance of the sediment that might uncover human remains. The mission of the RV Petrel was strictly observational. The team honored this boundary by maintaining a respectful distance from open hatches and by ensuring their robotic vehicle left no physical mark on the site. The decision to leave the Felix the Cat, Wildcat, and the 5-inch guns in the darkness is not just a preservation strategy, it is a legal requirement. To take a piece of the ship would be to desecrate a cemetery. The human cost of the loss adds weight to this prohibition. While the evacuation was a miracle of organization, saving 2,770 lives, the men who were lost were essential to the ship's fight. They were the damage control parties who stayed in the burning compartments to keep the generators running. They were the pilots who flew their aircraft until the fuel gauges read empty. Captain Frederick Sherman's final walkthrough of the burning decks ensured that every living man had a chance to escape, but he could not save those already taken by the initial blasts. The legacy of the Lady Lex extends beyond the tragedy of her sinking. The Battle of the Coral Sea was the first time in history that two carrier fleets fought without ever seeing each other. It was a tactical loss for the United States, as the Lexington was a fleet carrier exchanged for a light carrier, but it was a strategic victory. The damage inflicted on the Japanese air wings prevented the invasion of Port Moresby and kept major enemy carriers out of the Battle of Midway a month later. The Lexington spent her life to buy time for the Pacific Fleet. Now that life is memorialized in the cold silence of the deep. The survey is complete, the data has been harvested, the maps drawn, and the identification verified. The RV Petrel retrieves its vehicle, winching the machine back to the surface world of sunlight and air. The lights fade from the bottom. The blue F4F Wildcat and the torn steel of the hull return to the darkness. The ship remains exactly where she landed in 1942, heavily damaged but proud, guarding the approaches to Australia. She is a vessel on eternal patrol, watched over not by the crews of other ships, but by the crushing pressure of the ocean itself.